Hello, my name is Ashley Lothyan, Curator of Education at the San Bernardino County Museum. Join me and museum volunteer Mark Williams as we get a closer look at the Ice Age mammals that once roamed our region hundreds of years ago. So Mark,
I-
how long ago was the Ice Age and what type of mammals were alive?
Oh, well, it depends on where you were in the world. Here in North America, the last ice age started around 110,000 years ago and ended about 11,000 years ago. The kinds of animals that were alive, some of them, in fact, a good number of them are still around today, but they're mostly the smaller mammals. The larger mammals that lived during the Ice Age, for the most part, have died out. Things like, mastodons, mammoths, gomphotheres, giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, all of those are gone now. Even some of the middle-sized animals have died out. Things like dire wolves are no longer here. But a lot of the little guys, the mice, the voles, the ground squirrels, gophers, they survived and adapted to a warming climate.
And on this right side here, this geologic time scale, during what period was the Ice Age?
Okay, if you look at that and move up towards the top, where it says Pleistocene, that's the period where the ice ages, the last ones, began, and where the dividing point between the Holocene and the Pleistocene, that's basically the ending of the last ice age. Keep in mind, though, it isn't something that worked like a light switch. It didn't turn on and off. A gradual increase in warmth, climate change, but it didn't happen instantly. It ramped up over a long period of time. Incidentally, that picture on the left there gives you an idea of what San Bernardino Valley looked like at the end of the last ice age. Those glacier sheets didn't reach this far south, but the climate was considerably colder then than it is now.
So you mentioned our mastodon, and for scale, this is in our first floor of Earth Sciences, just to show how large this animal was. So
That's
here's myself, and then myself and one of the prints here on the floor.
right. Um, these animals were quite large. The mammoth, the one that most people know about, was the tallest at 13 feet. But the mastodon you see here and the gomphothere both were around 10 feet tall, still pretty big. And if you take a look at her little calf next to her, um, cute little guy, little tusks, um, they're, obviously about the same size as elephant calves are today. Ashley's standing in that footprint there, and you get an idea how big the adult's feet were.
Okay. So we mentioned the mammoth. I have an image here, illustration, as well as what is one of its teeth.
Yeah, on the left there, the drawing of the mammoth gives you an idea of what these animals looked like. The most distinctive feature is those big tusks that are big, long, curved, swooping things. Tusk, by the way, is a tooth, grows out of the jaw just like any other teeth, except these are much longer. All elephant species have them, but the mammoths were the largest. They continued to grow throughout the animal's life, so they got longer. That little guy we saw in the last picture, his tusks will get a lot bigger. Mammoths about 13 feet tall. Another distinctive feature, if you look at the top of the skull, there's kind of like a little bump there, almost looks like an Elvis hairdo. Very distinctive feature. You can always tell a mammoth skull by that bony crest or bump there at the top. The teeth there tell us a lot about what the animal ate. In this particular case, it's one of four teeth. They're a little bit bigger than your fist. They continued to grow throughout the animal's life, just like the tusks did. If you notice those diagonal lines along the edge of the tooth that's facing towards the front of us, those are the growth points that would work their way up to the top of the tooth. And that top part of the tooth is ridged. It's almost like a cheese grater, very good for doing this. These animals were all herbivores. They ate nothing but plants. And so this was very good at grinding up grasses, shredding them.
And what about for this one here?
That guy is the Gomphothere. He's one of the 3 extinct elephant species that we had in North America. The other 2, of course, Mammoth and Mastodon. Looks a little bit different. The ears are very much like the modern elephant, modern Asian elephant, and the trunk is obviously elephant-like, but it's shorter. What is really different is those tusks. There are actually 4 of them, 2 on each side of the trunk there, and they're much shorter. Also about 10 feet tall, about the same weight as a mastodon, about 7 to 8 tons for a mature, well-nourished adult.
So, Mark, how did scientists know what species looked like hundreds or even thousands of years ago from these illustrations?
For these, mostly through skeletal remains. Fossil skeletons can give us a really good idea of the shape and size of these animals, how they were constructed, tells us a lot about how they walked, how they moved. But with the Ice Age mammals, we're really fortunate in that we have some complete specimens, not just the skeleton, but the entire body. So we know what color their fur was. We know, well, what their eye color was even, because we have the complete body. These were Ice Age mammals again. They fell into crevasses. They got covered up with snow and ice, preserved, kind of like a mastodon popsicle. But they give us a real look at the animal to a much greater degree than we have with pretty much any other specimens.
Very interesting. And going back to our American mastodon.
Yeah. Shaggy coat. You notice the tusks here, very long, but they don't have those big swooping curves that the mammoth does. Long trunk like modern elephants, smaller ears. On the right-hand side, if you take a look at the teeth, they look different than the mammoth's tooth, but these are still herbivores. So those teeth are much more like the ones in the back of our mouth, our molars. They're good for crunching rather than grinding. So they would pull branches off of low bushes, stuff the whole thing in their mouth and crunch, where the mammoth would be more of a grazing animal, pulling up tufts of grass and shredding those. So the teeth are different. There's another difference too. The mastodon only got 1 set of teeth. And so if they break or wear, they don't get replaced. And that's very different than what we see with the mammoth. Mammoth also had 4 teeth, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Mastodon has 8.
So you mentioned its fur coat a little bit. So I do have a replica example from Education Collection, but.
Right. Look how thick that fur is and how long it is. Imagine that would be a really warm coat to have in a cold, cold climate. What you don't see is that underneath that skin, there was a layer of fat, about 1 inch thick. Fat's a very good insulator against cold. These were cold weather adapted animals, and they survived for, in the case of the mastodon, 16 million years. For the mammoth, 1.6 million, but they were around for a long time. They were very successful with their adaptation.
So I did put a side-by-side comparison between the mammoth and mastodon teeth, just to get, just compare and contrast.
So which is which?
The left is mastodon, right mammoth. Is that correct?
Gold star. They do look very different because they fed on different kinds of plant material, but they're still plant eaters. They are still herbivores.
Okay. So this last slide here is from our first floor of Earth Sciences, right when you walk in, prehistoric elephants in the Southwest.
And you can see the three there and the differences. Obviously, the mammoth is the largest. That's why it gets its name. But all three of them lived in this area, and all three of them died out at the end of the last ice age. Animals go extinct for a number of different reasons, but in this area with these animals, there were two principal reasons. The first one is climate change. Things were starting to warm up. Remember that thick, heavy fur coat. Remember that layer of fat that was a good insulator against cold. When these animals were presented with warmer climate, they weren't able to adapt quickly enough to change and kind of move with the times. It really caused them to suffer. And the second reason was a lack of food. Remember, these are herbivores, so all of the plants that grew during the ice age were cold weather adapted plants. So when things started to warm up, those plants started to die out, and that caused problems for these species as well.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining me and sharing all this information.
Well, thank you.